With the renewed conflict between the Israelis and Hamas, the peace talks in Egypt appear to have hit a roadblock. For more, CCTV's Adel El-Marouki joins us live from Cairo.
Well, it seems that the peace talks are collapsing, but no one is trying to give in just yet. The rockets have been fired about 8 hours before the 24-hour extension has been agreed upon yesterday, and there seems to be casualties on Gaza for the response Israel made after rockets were fired into Israel. The MAN news agency is reporting 4 casualties, 2 injured and 2 dead, 2 of them children. Now we've heard that Prime Minister Netanyahu has recalled the Israeli delegation to go back and leave Cairo, but we still don't have any confirmation that they have left Cairo. But the Palestinian delegation here in Cairo are still continuing a new draft for the talks.
The attacks came just hours after Egypt secured a 24-hour extension to its temporary truce, and they halted talks that have been struggling for days. Analysts say both sides need a truce, yet they are a long way from a deal.
Both sides want to reach a quick calm, but from their own perspective, they also want to get the most gains to justify to their people why were thousands killed in Gaza and why millions of shekels were spent on the war. International pressure is also mounting on Israel, and suspicions are surrounding Hamas positions in this conflict, so both can't afford to lose any more.
More than 2,000 people were killed in the month-long conflict. Egypt has been mediating for several days. It has proposed an end to the hostilities and a lifting of the 6-year blockade of Gaza. Neither side, though, is willing to give ground.
The Palestinian delegation cannot provide any sacrifices in these talks. The talks are to end the Israeli aggression on Palestinians. Second is to regain Palestinian rights that the Israeli enemy wasted.
The Palestinian delegation chief Azam al-Ahmad had earlier said the only sticking points were in phrasing.
Now, Azam al-Ahmad has also spoke once again a couple of hours ago, saying that they have finalized another draft for the proposal. They have submitted it to Egypt, which in turn should give it to Israel. He says that the time is running out and the end of the 24-hour truce is still, or at least they're working as if it still exists, and they're saying that they will try to reach another deal or at least push forward another agreement to cease the fire once again. And also still, they will be waiting for a reply from Israel.
All right, we are just getting some word in now that a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas has been broken once again, just hours after Israel and Hamas agreed to extend the ceasefire until tonight. The Israeli military reported a number of rockets that were fired over from the Gaza Strip. Connor Powell is live in Jerusalem. So, Connor, what's likely to happen tonight now that this ceasefire has been broken?
Well, Martha, Israel has said they will answer calm with calm and airstrikes or rockets with airstrikes. And we understand that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered retaliatory airstrikes in Gaza. But what we're hearing about a ceasefire agreement is that neither side, Hamas nor Israel, are of really any sort of feeling or stomach to go back to the intense fighting that we've seen the past month or so. So there are still talks. Now, Egypt has been hosting these negotiations between Israel and Hamas for the last week in Cairo. A long-term final agreement that really satisfies the needs and demands of both sides seems really unlikely tonight, but a partial deal based on calm, meaning no rockets from Hamas, which of course is a big if, will allow Israel to ease the blockade around Gaza, and if that calm holds, reconstruction material will be allowed to go into Gaza, and the area that Palestinian fishermen are allowed to fish in will also be expanded. But the big issues like a seaport and the total disarming of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Martha, well, those seem really unlikely to be handled tonight or in the next few days. They'll be pushed to an additional round of talks.
Why is there some optimism that a second round of talks might succeed here where they have failed before?
Well, Martha, this is the third conflict now in 6 years between Israel and Hamas, and the demands and the issues surrounding these conflicts, they haven't changed. but a lot of other crucial points have changed that give some optimism for sort of a long-term deal. Now, the international community, particularly the EU, seems really reluctant to commit any type of large-scale money and funding for Gaza for reconstruction without a long-term agreement that really meets the demands of both the Israelis and the Palestinians. Also, this is a crucial point. Hamas is holding the bodies of 2 dead Israeli soldiers, meaning Israel has no choice but to continue negotiating and talking with Hamas about these larger issues in order to get these bodies back. Now, of course, Hamas has broken ceasefires before, as we just saw here in the last hour or so, and Israel doesn't trust Hamas. Hamas doesn't trust Israel, so there is a lot of reason for pessimism, Martha, but the two sides are going to continue talking. There's a lot of pressure and a lot of reasons to continue talking.
Let's hope. Connor, thank you very much.
The Middle East ceasefire is over with deadly consequences. Israel launched a wave of airstrikes over Gaza in retaliation for rockets fired into Israel. That aerial assault breaks a nearly week-long truce between the two sides. CCTV's Mahal Bardavid is in Tel Aviv. And Mahal, what can you tell us about these latest attacks?
Elaine, since the ceasefire collapsed, at least 10 rockets have been fired into Israel. 2 rockets were fired into Tel Aviv, about a kilometer away from where we're standing. About an hour ago, it was intercepted by the Iron Dome. Other rockets were fired into southern Israel, into the cities of Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Netivot. The city of Ashkelon has been reverted into an emergency alert level. The beaches have shut down. The market has shut down. The municipality has called for the citizens to avoid large gatherings at the moment. Israel was fast to respond. At least 25 airstrikes took place since the rockets were first fired into Israel. Israel took at least 25 airstrikes into Gaza. The health ministry of Gaza has reported that at least 1 person was killed. A 5-year-old has been reported to have been killed, according to the health ministry. There are no reports of casualties on the Israeli side. There were signs that the ceasefire was going to collapse. Hamas spokesman had earlier stated that, and I quote him when I say, if Prime Minister Netanyahu does not understand from the language of politics in Cairo, then we will make him understand. This was the warning from Hamas. On the other hand, Prime Minister Netanyahu had visited a southern city yesterday and had called for the people of Israel to be patient, signaling that the operation might continue. Elaine?
Now that the ceasefire has collapsed, what is the sentiment from the Israeli population there?
Well, earlier there were findings from a recent poll that at least 58% of Israeli Jews supported the Israeli government continuing fighting until Hamas surrenders. In the meantime, there were also reports from Gaza that people are fleeing the area. Of course, the devastation continues for the Palestinians there at the moment. There is a lack of power, a lack of water supply as well. So the situation is worsening both for Israelis and Palestinians.
Important breaking news from the Middle East. Rockets are flying again between Israel and Gaza as a U.S. official confirms the ceasefire has broken down. Let's go straight now to CNN's Frederick Pleitgen in Gaza City. What's happening, Fred?
Well, Brianna, it seemed as though the negotiations were in a dead end for the better part of the day. They were set to expire at midnight local time anyway, so about 44 minutes ago. Now, what happened then is in the early evening hours, there was a barrage of rockets that was fired from Gaza towards Israel. It only took about 20 minutes for the Israeli Air Force to then respond. There were some airstrikes really all across the Gaza Strip. And then what happened was there was one massive strike in central Gaza City, not very far from our location here. We heard at least 4 major explosions. Those apparently took out a house in central Gaza. And after that, what we've seen is a barrage of rocket fire going from Gaza towards Israeli territory. The Qassam brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, say that they fired about 70 rockets. The Israel Defense Forces so far are confirming that at least 50 rockets have been fired towards Israeli territory, including the towns of Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Beersheba, and Sderot, including some others as well. Some of those rockets have been shot down by the Iron Dome missile defense system. However, at this point in time, we are still hearing jets overhead. We're hearing drones overhead. So a ceasefire that the two parties, of course, were aiming for is something that seems a very remote possibility at this point in time. In fact, I just heard rockets go off just a couple of minutes before we went to air just now, Brianna.
Things changing very quickly. Fred Pleitgen for us in Gaza City. Thank you.
New troubles now for the latest ceasefire in the Middle East as Israel responds to rocket attacks launched from the Gaza Strip, which broke the truce just hours before it was set to expire. And that ceasefire violation forcing Israel to pull its delegation out of Cairo, where negotiations were underway to try and hammer out an end to this conflict. Connor Powell joining us now live from Jerusalem with the very latest on this story. Connor?
Well, Uma, we've seen Hamas do this in the past. As the deadline nears for the end of a ceasefire, they fire rockets. As we understand, Israel has sent airstrikes into Gaza. But the calm seems to have been returned now. We aren't seeing a flurry of rockets back and forth. And no one is suggesting that we're going to return to the heavy fighting that we saw in previous weeks. And nobody's even suggesting that there still might not be some type of limited or partial agreement tonight or in the next day or so. Of course, Egypt has been hosting indirect talks between Israel and Hamas in recent days. There is still no word if a ceasefire agreement, a long-term one, would be a partial or a long-term one. Both Israel and Palestinian media seem to think that there could still be some type of deal, meaning if Hamas holds its fire, and that's a big if, of course, Israel will ease the blockade around Gaza, and if the calm holds, construction material will be allowed into Gaza. It sounds as if the big issues like a seaport for Gaza and the total disarming of Hamas and the Gaza Strip will be left out of any agreement in the near term and pushed to another round of talks. Skeptics, of course, say, well, if there's calm, why would either side return to talk? But the international community is pushing hard. They appear very reluctant to commit any type of money for reconstruction if there isn't a long-term agreement that really meets the needs and demands of both Israelis and Palestinians. And also, this is a key point, Hamas holds the bodies of 2 Israeli soldiers, meaning that Israel is still going to have to negotiate with Hamas on several points if they hope to get these bodies back. Both sides are not ruling out any more talks, but Israel is saying, as always, they will not negotiate under fire. Hamas saying that they're not going to negotiate if this blockade is not going to be lifted. So, Uma, what we're seeing right now is some negotiations, but it does appear that we may be back on track for talks. Whether or not those talks lead to anything, that's the really big question. Both sides exchanging fire here just in the last few hours, but we aren't seeing a return to the heavy fighting that we've seen for the last month or so, Uma.
Well, that's the good news, at least, but both sides, as you say, still remain far apart on their differences. Thank you very much for that update.
For more on this latest setback in Gaza peace talks, we're joined by Michelle Dunn. She's Senior Associate of the Middle East Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace here in Washington, D.C. Well, once again, we've seen another apparent step backwards in the peace talks. Are both sides still pretty much hung up on the same issues, would you say?
We've seen a little bit of information leaking out from the talks in Cairo about what the hang-up might be. What we see from the Palestinian side is that they're pressing for some significant opening up of Gaza. For example, opening of the Gaza seaport. Not that that would necessarily be done immediately, but they're pressing for some sort of timeline. Like that would be discussed, for example, 1 month after the ceasefire actually took hold, whereas the Israelis apparently are unwilling to agree to that. From the Israeli side, they seem to have given up on their initial goal of complete demilitarization of Gaza, but they're still pressing for something, some kind of an, for example, international task force or something to be established. In order to prevent more weapons and construction materials that could be used to build weapons getting into Gaza in the future.
Is there room for compromise? I mean, it seems like we keep lurching in one direction and then the other. It seems like 1 minute where people are encouraged, it looks like maybe there's a long-term deal, and then before you know it, things collapse again.
It will probably not be a long-term deal. There will probably be some set of arrangements that will be short-term, and if it's like previous agreements, many of them will not actually be implemented in the end. But both sides, both the Israelis and Hamas, need to show that the sacrifices that they made were somehow worth it, that they got something out of it. So it's important to them, at least at the time that the ceasefire arrangement is announced, that it looks as though they accomplished something.
It's interesting. I was reading a couple of articles about how some of the international players really aren't sticking to the script. The Egyptian president broke from past traditions of Mubarak and Morsi and how he's handling things. U.S. government just this week delaying a shipment of Hellfire missiles to Israel, which is kind of a departure as well. Can outside players change the dynamics at all?
Outside players can play a bridging role once the two parties themselves are ready to reach an agreement. But the whole region is in a period of change, of flux, and a very strong polarization. And that has clearly made it more difficult to reach a ceasefire this time than it was in previous conflicts between Israel and Hamas. The fact that you have Egypt and Saudi Arabia and certain players on one side, and Qatar and Turkey on another, and pulling Hamas and the Palestinian players in different directions. That has been very problematic.
What about the United Nations or other nations getting involved? I mean, is there a role to play for the world body, or should other nations be more involved in the process?
In terms of the United Nations, they have volunteered to play a role in various ways, but right now there are strong objections in Israel. There's a feeling in Israel that United Nations bodies tend to be very critical of Israel. For example, the establishment of a commission to look into possible war crimes during this conflict. So Israel is going to be resistant to the UN playing a major role, and Israel will want the United States, its major ally, to play a more prominent role.
Israel will want the United States, its major ally, to play a more prominent role.
All right, Michelle Dunn, with your observations on this ongoing peace process, I'm sure we'll be checking in with you again. Doesn't look like it's ending anytime soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.